Hi, I'm Debra, business owner and mom to Gen Z kids on a mission to make sure they get hired and become financially independent as soon as possible. If you're a parent wanting to get your kids hired or a new job seeker desperately trying to get hired, this show is for you, and I am so glad you're here. Hey everyone, welcome back. Happy New Year. Hope everybody had a wonderful holiday season. I know I did. I loved having my kids home. It was super chaotic and crazy and fun, all wrapped into one. Sleep deprivation set in yet again, just constantly wondering, where are they? When are they going to be home? Did they lock the door? Did they set the alarm? All the things that all parents of college students know full well and experience along with me. So I'm sure you know what I'm referring to. Okay, so I have lots of new topics and things planned for you this season, if you will, this year. And I want to go ahead and get started with a question that came in at the end of the year from a parent who also happens to be a friend of mine. And she had a really kind of interesting thought that I want to flesh out a little bit more because I clearly have glazed over it a bit too much, and I want to dive deep into this. So one of the things she was asking about is that, you know, I talk a lot about how important it is to get to know your professors and making connections and these types of things. But she's like, what I need to know is what is the actual benefit of doing that so that I can give my child some actual instruction on why it's worth it. And I think that's really a great point because so many teenagers and young adults hear us talk constantly, and I swear they hear Charlie Brown like womp, 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 because we're incessant about making sure they know all the things. And, you know, things that might seem obvious to us aren't necessarily obvious to them. And they definitely want to know, well, why is this worth my time for me to do it? Because think about it. They'd rather be scrolling TikTok, sleeping, hanging out with their friends, a million other things. So when you tell them, hey, make sure you get to know your professors this semester, they're like, why? Okay, so here's the deal. There's lots of reasons why. But first, I want to be really clear on what I mean by this. This does not mean, and I'm sure this is how these kids are taking it. What I do not mean is, spend every spare minute you can getting to know all your professors, you know, bringing them gift cards, snacks, showing up before class, after class. None of that is what I'm referring to. I'm simply referring to a pop in at the beginning of the semester during office hours. Pop in again 3 weeks later. And again, every couple weeks to just let them know who you are. So again, this should not take a ton of time. I also am not advising them to do this with every single professor because again, they are stretched thin, especially if they play a sport or they have a full schedule. Like there's a lot on their plate to begin with. But what I'm advocating for is focus on a couple, one, maybe two each semester, key professors, preferably in your major, because remember, what's in it for me is important as well. And those are the professors that I am advocating you get to know, or rather them get to know you. So one of the things that this parent pointed out was like, hey, when I was in college, none of my professors were at all helpful getting internships or jobs. So why should I be telling my child to do this? Okay, couple things about that. Number one, everybody's college experience is very different. The place you go to school is different. The caliber of professors are different. Everything about it is unique. So what I'm here to tell you is there are always going to be some professors that still work in the private sector in some capacity. Those are the ideal situations. The ones that are just lifelong, I've been in academia my whole life and this is where I will live and die. That's fine. They have opportunities and definitely positives about them too. But if your child can focus on the one that maybe teaches a night class or teaches a late afternoon class, and they're doing that because they have a day job in the field that your child wants to eventually work in, that is gold. Because those people have connections in the real world outside of academia that's real life. I know this was the case for me personally when I was in college. I know I hear about it from my own kids. So first of all, be strategic about that. So if there are any professors in your child's major that you know work in the private sector, that is absolutely positively low-hanging fruit in terms of opening doors for internships and job opportunities. However, that is not the only reason to get to know your professors. There are other circumstances. And what I'm about to share, you might be thinking, well, that's never going to happen to my kid. All I have to say is never say never. This could be an opportunity where there might be some leeway when you are on the edge. Now, when I say leeway, even if you have a strong academic student and you are killing it, everybody is human and everybody makes mistakes. And even if you are slaying, you might sleep through a final or show up on the wrong day. And if that teacher has no idea who you are, they are not going to care, or they're going to care less when you reach out to them saying, I screwed up, I slept through my final, I showed up the wrong building, whatever the circumstance may be. However, if you've popped in from time to time and they're like, oh, hey, that's Debra. She's that diligent student that, introduced herself at the beginning of the semester in office hour when nobody was there. And she's, shown up from time to time and asked me questions about a lecture that I had or asked me to elaborate on something that before a test. Those are things that they're going to remember and that are going to stick with them so that if you do get yourself in a pickle, they are more likely to be willing to help you. Now, another example, and I've had this happen with my own son. He has said, "Oh yeah, Mom, I got to know this professor, and even though grades weren't posted yet, I sent an email saying, hey, I'm leaving for break, and I'm just dying to know my grade because I'm so close in this one particular situation. Is there any way you can share it?" And that teacher responded with a grade before grades were posted. That's another example. Another example is just more one-on-one interaction. You might need a letter of recommendation for graduate school. You might need a letter of recommendation for a job. There are so many opportunities that they could potentially come in handy for. You might get a circumstance where, like, for example, some companies know that some schools are known for certain things in certain programs, and those companies reach out to those departments at those schools and say, hey, we're looking for 3 students to fulfill these spots upon graduation. Do you have anyone you'd recommend? That's a perfect example of you want your kid to be that student. Again, I think that it's most beneficial when you're doing this for teachers in your major. Do I think that this is necessarily advantageous to do to, a math teacher freshman year when you have no intention of having math be any part of your major? Probably not. It can't hurt, but I just don't know if it's worth the return on investment, if you will, for their time. Also important to know, no one's doing this. When I say no one, of course, there are some students doing this. But what happens is, and what professors will tell you universally is, they may have never met you, had no idea you were even in their class until the last few weeks of school when you might be struggling and you're panicking. And when everybody shows up at office hour at that time, they are less likely to pay any attention to what your real issue is because you haven't made any effort to get to know them, show an interest in their subject or anything. So I strongly believe that having relationships with professors on campus is invaluable. Getting to know you has more value than grades, in my opinion, because I just think there's too many opportunities to benefit you down the road. And those opportunities are loosely defined. It might be a job. It might be an internship. It might be a letter. It might be just hey, I have somebody that I'd like you to meet that I think might be a good connection for you. It could be as simple as that. It all goes into the file of not what you know, but who you know. And I think it's so important to start teaching your kids to fostering those relationships as early as possible because I am convinced they make the biggest difference in your future. Period. End of story. So the next time you encourage your kid to, what you should do this semester is find a professor or 2 in your major. And maybe they're not taking major classes their first or second year. So maybe this is something that might wait till their 3rd year, whatever. And I think you should show up to office hour in the beginning of the year and go every couple weeks and introduce yourself. Let me just give you another example. My son was struggling in a class last semester, and this happened to be a math class, and this teacher had a very, very thick accent. And he had a really hard time understanding what he was saying. And so he was so frustrated that he wasn't understanding the concepts. And now you would think, well, it's math. Like how important is the communication per se? But it was for my son because he's such a visual and auditory learner. So this was critical. It's hard for him to just teach himself math. So he was calling me frustrated constantly. And I kept saying, are you going to office hour? And he goes, what's the point of going to office hour when I can't understand what he's saying? touche, seemed like a reasonable point. So I said, okay, well, let's get a tutor right away. So we got the tutor. He did slightly better on a quiz and then bombed another one. And so I said, listen, I'm not spending another $1 on a tutor until you go to office hour. You need to at least introduce yourself to the teacher. And at that time, one-on-one, you need to politely say, Professor, I'm having a really hard time understanding what you're saying. Okay, sorry, my earpod fell out of my ear. Technical difficulty. Okay. Anyway, so he went to meet with this professor, explained that he was having a hard time understanding him due to his accent, and he said it in a very polite way. And the professor was very receptive and said, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Well, guess what? When he met with him one-on-one, it was so much easier for him to understand what he was saying. So even things as small as that. And I'm telling you, at the end of that semester, when my son was probably on the cusp of one grade versus another, the multiple times of showing up at office hour pushed him over the edge. And it is invaluable. And he fought me on it left and right of, I don't want to go to office hour. It's stupid. Nobody goes. Is he even there? Is that even a thing? I'm here to tell you, yes, office hour is a thing. Don't let your kid tell you it isn't. No one goes at the beginning of the year. Hardly any students go at the middle of the semester, and everyone is there panicking at the end. So I advise you, encourage your child, go at the beginning, introduce themselves, ask open-ended questions, especially in their major. Let that professor think they're interested. Say things like, hey, I'm really interested in a potential career. I'm a business major. I'm not sure what my emphasis is yet. Or I'm a math major. I'm not sure what I want to do. Do you have any suggestions? Do you know anybody? I would love to get more information. They love hearing that stuff. They love those students. So that is why I advocate you go and meet your professors and take an invested interest in it. It can never hurt you. And the amount of time this requires is so minimal. Again, if your kid is so busy and has a full load, if they check in 4 times a semester, it's significant. They know who they are. Because remember, in addition to walking in and seeing them 4 times, they can also follow up with an email. Hey, Professor so-and-so. Saw you last Tuesday, really enjoyed your lecture, wanted to find out if you knew anybody in industry that could potentially help me with the following. These things all matter. That is all I have for today, folks. As always, any questions, any thoughts, any comments, please email me. I always have my email in the show notes, and I am super excited for this year. I have a lot of fun things coming down the pipeline. I want to let you know that I'm continuing to help students with their resumes and job preparedness, and I am continually reminded how important this is because it is not intuitive. They are not being taught in university, and they truly do not know what to do. So I hope everybody has a great start to the new year, and I look forward to talking to you next week. Take care.